Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz Podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 409, and today's guest is Ilia Papas, serial entrepreneur and co-founder of Band and Blue Apron. Do you know what the enchilada factor is? Probably not, unless you were part of the Blue Apron team that created a national brand and one of the pillar companies in the meal kit food delivery category that ultimately went public. In this interview, Ilia shares the inside look at those hypergrowth years, including the company's use of machine learning for planning labor and food ordering so they could fulfill those enchilada orders, also known internally as the enchilada factor, which always caused a spike when it was offered on the menu. Ilia's latest company is Band, and no, it's not the musical kind. Instead, the company is focused on a massive, underserved sector where trillions of dollars flow between businesses, yet technical innovation has been severely lacking. Band has built the smart operating system for B2B trade agreements, providing AI-powered rebate and incentive tracking for distributors, manufacturers, and purchasing groups. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like Ilia's background story, plus the details on his siblings and their collective success in the tech industry, interning at his brother Art's company Bullhorn, and then building the foundation of his career at web consulting firms like Molecular and Opteros, where he worked on the original version of Rulala, how he met his co-founder Matt Salzberg, and why they pivoted from a Kickstarter for science idea to food delivery in 2012, bringing on a third co-founder, Matt Wadiak, who brought the culinary expertise, and why they named the company Blue Apron, their approach to growth marketing to compete against HelloFresh and Plated and scaling to millions of meals a week, the story of the IPO in 2017 and the unique challenges of running a publicly traded company, all the details about Band and why Ilia chose this underserved industry, plus how his approach to building a company is different this time around, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. It's hard to believe that we have over 400 episodes of the VentureFizz podcast. We have built up an amazing catalog of inspirational stories around building companies, and every episode includes lots of great advice to follow as well. If you haven't checked out our past interviews, go to venturefizz.com/podcast for the complete list, where you can filter guests based on industry, stage, and other various topics. Oh, and one ask, please share the VentureFizz podcast with your friends and colleagues in the industry. I appreciate all of your support. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Ilia. Ilia, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Excited to do this.
I am excited too. I don't know when, but at some point in my travels, I just go through LinkedIn a lot, and I remember looking at your LinkedIn profile, being in Boston, and just was like, wait, the co-founder of Blue Apron is in Boston? And I always have these moments with different people where I have that same reaction where I'm like, wait, this person's in Boston. So I'm excited to talk to you about your professional journey, obviously the story of Blue Apron, and obviously what you're working on now. But something I want to talk about, just kind of aside, and maybe this factors into your background story too, but there's been this kind of small trend of the podcast interviews I've been hosting with sibling interviews. I've had the power couple, married, entrepreneurs before, but not a lot of the siblings were both, individuals were founders of companies. So, or maybe a high ranking executive or whatever the case may be. So, just recently I had Sue Graham and Liz Graham. Well, Liz was on a long time ago, in OG era of the podcast, but Sue was recent. So they're both have done extraordinary things throughout their careers in the tech industry. So I'm like, this might be a trend. So let's, kind of get into where the sibling thing comes from.
You should get the parents in there too, to kind of figure out what drove them to have kids that have such chips on their shoulder. They got to go out and prove themselves.
That's the thing. The mom of Dave Grohl wrote a book about how do you, create a rock star.
Yeah.
So why not?
Great.
Maybe that's a good idea.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So let's talk about your growth. I guess we'll just go into your background of, the siblings of growing up in your household.
Sure. I mean, I think for my family, my brother is the CEO of a company called Bullhorn, which is a very successful staffing and recruiting software company. My sister is, the chief commercial counsel for Salesforce. So everybody kind of went off into tech, and both our parents are doctors. So my mother is a professor at Tufts Dental School and has taught and practiced dentistry for as long as I've known, and my father is a psychiatrist. And I think maybe the independence of being a doctor bred some desire not to really be told what to do or whatever it is that drives people towards entrepreneurship. But for me growing up, both my brother and sister are a little bit older. My brother's 6.5 years older. My sister is from my dad's first marriage, so a little bit older as well. And so I had these parents who were physicians and kind of doing their own thing. My father still is private practicing even today, out of the house, which is great. Seeing my brother go off and start a company kind of showed me a way that hadn't previously even been something I considered, growing up and watching people go off and, stay at companies for 10 or 20 years or something like that in a cubicle environment. Knowing that someone could do a startup was very exciting.
Well, so your brother Art, he was episode 196. So I'm up to over 400 now.
Wow.
Yeah. So we talked about his whole background story there. But, so as a child, like, did you love technology? Like, what were you like?
Yeah, both my brother and I were very much into, any sort of like audio equipment our parents had, and, toys, and taking apart our toys and putting them back together. Remote control cars, definitely always fascinated in that. And then once like personal computing started to come around, I forget what year it was. I want to say it was like 89 or like very early 90s. We got our very first computer, which was this Zenith 8086. And I remember there were, it was the first like kind of color computer. So there was CGA, which was 4 colors. It was like magenta, cyan, and something else. And then there was EGA, which was like 16 colors. And then VGA was like 256 colors. And then you actually had like computers that could do pictures and things like that. So we had like I remember we had some computer that had like 15 colors. So we couldn't play all the games that had the 16 colors or something like that. But my parents got it mostly for word processing. My mother was writing grants and things like that for the dental research. And so I would just kind of tinker with what was available there. And it was an MS-DOS computer, and it had BASIC on it. And so I'd write little applications to, do little choose your own adventure stories or things like that. And, make like kind of pixel art with it. But I don't know what it was, but I was always kind of interested in the computer. And as we upgraded and got a better computer and started playing video games, I was always just drawn to kind of figuring out how that stuff works and tinkering with it.
So that must have led you down the path of studying computer science at Tufts then.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I was very happy to not have to go through the same angst of trying to pick a major or anything like that. I, growing up in Massachusetts, we had a great school, like education system, and I was able to take computer science actually in high school. I had a really good teacher there. And so being able to kind of continue that, interest in technology. And then also it was just around, I went into college at, around like 2000, when there wasn't like, we were just coming out of kind of the tech boom, but I had been interning at my brother Art's company before it was.
While you were in high school.
Yeah. I started off as kind of like their IT guy, just fixing all of their computer, like Frankensteining their broken computers and putting them back together for new employees. And then ultimately started writing code. They had Cold Fusion was the technology they used. And so I got exposure very early on to what an alternative kind of like work environment could look like. They were in this really cool warehouse, not a warehouse. It was like an abandoned, I don't know if it was a mill or I think it was a schoolhouse on B Street in South Boston. Before
Wow.
South Boston, it became what it is now. And it was just, people kind of doing whatever it took. And right back then it was something like a Elance today, where they were hooking up talent like voice actors to do your voicemail message, or do a voiceover for a radio commercial. And it was just a really fun environment, really, really cool people. And getting to be a part of that, I kind of got the bug. It's like, oh, I could start a company someday. But I was also very risk averse. And so it took me a very long time to do it myself. But I think doing that and then starting to write code for him gave me the confidence to be like, oh, this could be a career. I think it pays all right. So when I go to college, I'll major in computer science, even though I'm interested in other things. And so it just seemed like the smartest choice from a maximizing optionality when I got out and having a degree that could open some doors for me. I actually worked at his company through college as well, like 25 hours a week or something. And I remember I built their first mobile app, which was...
You did?
It was a mobile web interface. And so there was this device, they'd got like 5 of these phones from T-Mobile that were Windows CE, which was like Windows answer to the Palm Pilot. And it was compact edition or something like that. And it had a Internet Explorer browser on it. The screen was like slightly bigger than a postage stamp, and you had a stylus. And my brother was like, hey, we want to give some of these to our customers. Can you give them like their email on there? And so I just built in Cold Fusion, a really stripped down version of their email service with just like text links. And I remember my brother saying, like, years later, he's like, my customers still are using that like mobile mail you built because it's so stripped down. It's so fast. Like it's, when they're on their phone, they just like tap a text link, they can read their message and, delete, reply, like whatever they need to do. So that was a lot of fun. So I got to see kind of firsthand, I could build something and get feedback from someone that like it's making their life easier.
Yeah. And you were probably making a good wage in college, where that's a nice thing. I was like working on campus jobs, making nothing, just trying to save enough beer money.
Yeah, I was doing all right. I think it was like $20 an hour or something, which back in 2003
Amazing.
or something was a pretty big deal. But yeah, I do remember when I graduated, I was like, I can't work for my brother. I have to like go off and do my own thing. And so I talked to a recruiter, and my roommate had gotten a job, and I asked him what he was making. So when the recruiter made the offer, I was like, well, my roommate's making this much, and that sounds good. And I remember the recruiter goes, oh yeah, that's fine. I don't even need to get approval for that. Like, you're good.
You sold yourself short. You're
Yeah,
like,
and I was like, okay, lesson learned.
Let them shoot first, then you follow up after. So you were with Molecular, and they were called Molecular by the time you joined, right? They weren't T-Vision. Like that was the legacy name of
post T-Visions. Yeah, so that was Ralph Bowles.
Ralph's amazing.
Really, really great group of people. And back then it was kind of a split house between .NET development and Java. And so I did a little bit of .NET, but most of the work I was doing, my very first project with them, this is like a boutique consulting firm in Boston, maybe like 200 people or so, was with the Knights of Columbus, which I don't think many people know. Maybe they've driven by like one of these halls, but it's kind of this Catholic organization, which also happens to be one of the largest insurance companies. And so if you're ever driving down 95 in New Haven, they have this huge building. It's got to be like 30 stories or something like that, with like 4 brown columns. It looks like Tootsie Rolls. And so I remember that was my first exposure to being like on site at a client, and we were taking like mainframe outputs and producing reports for the leadership. And I remember we had to be on site a lot, and they were very old school. And every time we would like go to lunch or something, we'd have to go down this like back stairwell. And there was always the same time every day, there was a woman who would just take a nap at her desk. And we would walk by, and I was like, okay, this is
like
what
a Dilbert
corporate America looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. Office space, like
yeah.
TPS reports. All right. So you spent a good couple years at Molecular, then you went to Opteros, which is when I was just starting my own recruiting firm, like Opteros and Amy Robinson were amazing
Yeah.
customers of mine. So I was working closely with the team there. Like I didn't know Bob Jett, but I remember him. Um, and yeah, so you worked on the original Rula La, right?
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, Molecular was great, and did work for CNN and Turner Broadcasting, and got to see my work go up on their like public website, and that was really cool. And then something happened at Molecular where all the people that I really loved working with just started disappearing, and I didn't know where they were going. And this is like my second year out of school, and then finally I bumped into someone, and they're like, "Yeah, we're all going to this company, Taros." And so I came and interviewed there, and it was kind of all the people I had loved from Molecular and all these new cool people. And yeah, it was a great process. And I remember I got my the day I started there, I showed up and they're like, "Hey, can you go to Atlanta?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's no problem." And they're like, "Today." And I'm like, "Okay." So I
Okay.
got lunch with a couple people, and then yeah, I got on a flight that night, and then I spent a year in Atlanta, basically, kind of traveling back
Working
and
for
forth.
Coke? Like who's in
No,
Atlanta?
that was the CNN and Turner broadcast. That was with Optara.
Ah,
I mixed that up.
yeah.
So that was coming in and doing that work, and then ultimately Optaros got very into e-commerce, and so yes, our the thing that kind of catapulted the business was there was a company called Smart Bargains, which was kind of like an overstock.com, and the CEO had heard of this French company that it was called Vente Privée, that had created a private event website where they had these like cool landing pages, and it opened at 11 a.m. and you had to be invited, and then you go in and you get to buy all of this like labeled merchandise at discounts. And so he had the vision for kind of creating this new version, and they brought in our company to help design it and kind of build this whole infrastructure to build a completely new company within the company. And then we kind of plugged in the order management system in the back end to their Smart Bargains like fulfillment engine. So that was really fun to be a part of that, because I think in 6 months that business eclipsed the previous 10 years of Smart Bargains revenue. And
Wow.
so it totally changed that company. And I remember I was out at a restaurant and I heard um, someone talking at me, but like, or not talking at me, it's someone talking to her friend behind me. And she was talking about how she found this new website, Rula La, and she got this watch and she loved it. She's talking about how like cool the website was, and that when you hovered over the picture, it would zoom in on the product. And I remember like that was a feature I had built, and
You're like,
because the product manager was like, "Hey, we're gonna license this technology to zoom in when you hover, but it costs like $5,000." And I was like, "Oh, I could build that." And so I just built this like JavaScript version of it that they ultimately got rid of, but I think it lasted for like 5 years or something.
but wait,
Like,
that was a feature that they would have to go and buy from a vendor to implement, where
yeah,
you're like,
back
I
then
can just,
there were companies like Scene7 that made their whole business out of like product merchandising for e-commerce and showing you different things, but they were very expensive. And so, I was like, don't pay 5,000 for that. Like I'll whip up a prototype that, of course, it then ended up taking like a month. It took like a day to get it like kind of working, and then a month to actually get it to work on all the browse like stuff you don't have to worry about today, like working on Internet Explorer 5 or 6 or something like that. Everything just works now.
well, Rue Guild Group is, still in existence and still doing
Yeah.
its thing, still a good company. So, all right. So after Opteros, how did you get going down the path of entrepreneurship, and what led you down the path of
Yeah.
starting Blue Apron?
So I loved consulting because, I'd always wanted to start a company of my own someday. I'd always wanted to, be CEO of some sort of software company at some point. But like I said, I was very risk averse. And so I wanted to get experience building scalable technology solutions. I wanted to understand what it was like to work with different cultures. So after Rue La La, we got work with Walmart.com to like overhaul their whole health category. And I got to be like the lead on that, which was really exciting. And I
So
remember
you had to go to Bentonville?
not Bentonville. So Walmart.com was based out of
San Francisco?
right outside of San Francisco, just
Yeah.
south. And so, yeah, my sister is out there. And so I got to go out there for a year and hang out with her all the time, which was great.
Oh, that's cool.
And so you get exposure to different technologies, different cultures. And like when someone calls in a consulting firm, they're kind of at their wits' end. Like you come in at the point where the culture of the company has reached a point where they can't do it in-house and they need to get outside help. And so I got to see a lot of like really powerful cultures. Like, you know, I have a lot of respect for Walmart's culture because they've scaled up something that is like pretty productive for a huge company. Because we've been in lots of huge companies where, there's total dysfunction in politics and nobody's actually trying to do anything that's good for the customer or the company. And so that was great. And then, I was like, I'm going to turn 30 at some point. So I'm going to start a company. I kind of have to do it. And so I started meeting people. And that's when my brother introduced me to someone who was kind of prototyping some technology for his company. This is called Insight Squared. This guy, Fred Shillmover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fred.
He's a Boston guy. He was building, all these cool dashboards and insights for Bullhorn. And I remember we met and we talked about, me potentially coming on board, maybe being a co-founder. And I was like, oh, I just got the lead on this Walmart project. It's kind of a big deal. I can't leave right now. And then I think it was like 6 months later or 12 months later, he was like, hey, why don't you come? We just raised a 10 million Series A, which, back then was a big deal.
Massive round of
Very
funding.
big deal. Yeah. Now that's like a seed round, but like, but yeah, I went to his happy hour, which was at Bessemer's office. And while I was there, kind of kicking myself, being like, that could have been me. I could have been doing that. Like,
I missed my opportunity. I suck.
I was just chatting with someone, and there was one of the venture capital associates from their New York office was in town. This guy, Matt Salzberg. And so we were just chatting and I was saying, oh, I'm thinking of starting a company at some point. And he's like, oh, cool. And then I didn't think much of it. We exchanged information being like, oh, maybe we'll get coffee if I'm in New York or whatever to learn more about venture capital. And then some time went by and ultimately, I think I ended up in New York and we got a coffee and he started kind of talking about some ideas that he had. And so we ended up, having a few phone conversations and, he came up to Boston and he had this idea for a science Kickstarter, basically, to fund researchers that were, in different areas of science with kind of crowdfunding. And, he was like very, had an incredible background. He had, gone to Harvard and then he worked at Blackstone and private equity. And he went to Harvard Business School and then he was at Bessemer, which is a very, respected venture capital firm. And I remember asking Fred about him, and he was like, "No, he's the real deal. You don't do those things unless you're, someone who really is capable and competent." And so, we had been talking about doing a startup, and I didn't want to leave Boston, and he was kind of like, "Hey, let's do this. You could be my CTO. Like I've got funding lined up. We just need to have someone in the CTO position, but you have to move to New York." And so at that time, I was very close to getting to the point where my serious girlfriend, now wife, and I were, thinking about, is this the time that we like move in together? Making a lot of decisions. So I was kind of at this decision point where I had to decide to quit my job, move to a completely new city, and then, I really liked my girlfriend. And so
Right.
asked her to move to this New York, a place she didn't want to go because she loves her family, and she had just landed in a job that like she really loved. Because if I was going to ask her to leave, I was like, I'm going to have to marry her. So I was deciding basically to do a startup, leave Boston, and get married all at the same time. And
Heavy, heavy decisions right there.
I was just like, you know what? Let's just do it. Like, and it's just
Do it.
it's so opposite of anything I've ever done in my life. I've always been, very, very hesitant to kind of take any big, bold moves. And we jumped in. This is February of 2012. And, I got like temporary furnished apartment in Murray Hill. And we just, got to work on the website, and we got into TechCrunch. We raised the money, and we started funding these science research projects. And I think we funded like 20 projects, and we were just finding a lot of friction. But before that had happened, this was February of 2012. In May, I asked my girlfriend to move down because I'm like, this is working. Like, we just got into TechCrunch. Like, come on down. Like, drop your life, come to New York. And then in June, we were like, we have to do something else. So we just like moved. We just signed a lease and moved into this apartment in the East Village, and it was just clear that even though we were funding, that we funded this like entomologist that went to Madagascar and found a new species of ants, and this like Cambridge, UK researcher that funded a supercomputer to find moons outside of our solar system.
Wow.
Like really cool stuff. But
Yeah.
the problem was, Kickstarter worked, and they don't like to think of themselves this way, but because it was kind of like pre-order e-commerce. Pebble Watch was like the big thing back then,
Of
and
course.
then
Yeah.
they raised
Yeah.
$10
Yeah.
million. But everybody who funded it got a Pebble Watch. And with these, researchers, the top funder of the ant project, got to name the species of ants, which was kind of cool.
I see. Yeah. You don't.
I think researchers also have this issue with what they call getting scooped. So anybody who's like a serious researcher doesn't want to put their idea out in the public because another
Right.
researcher might beat them to it. So there's a lot of secrecy, and it's not considered, distinguished to go, reach out to the public for raising funds. And then so there was like, it was hard to raise money. And then once we actually did get the money, it was hard to get the universities to take it because they're used to taking half of the money as like overhead to just cover costs of the university. And so they were like, we're not going to set up a bank account for $10,000 or something like that. So all of that led us to just kind of go back to the drawing board and start thinking of new ideas. And so we filled a whiteboard a couple times over with, Uber for haircuts and Warby Parker for strollers and you name it.
Birchbox for.
Yeah, totally.
For
All the
men.
subscription businesses were very popular, which kind of led us to our discovery. But we'd probably gone over 60 different ideas at that point, just trying to figure out what were we going to do. And over the weekend, a friend of mine had just moved into a new place, and he had like a patio in Hell's Kitchen, which was kind of a big deal to have any outdoor space in New York. And so he had a grill, and so we said like, oh, let's barbecue, and it's like, oh, let's do like a Argentinian like chimichurri steak or something like that. And so we looked up a recipe, and we had to go to like 3 different grocery stores to find the ingredients. And we finally tracked everything down, and it was great. And I was telling Matt about this at lunch during the week, and I was like, oh, we did this barbecue, and it was great, but it was like such a pain to like go get everything. And I said, I just wish there was a company that would send you the ingredients and you just cook them. Because I like cooking, but I can't stand grocery shopping. Like for whatever it is, like searching the shelves drives me nuts. And I remember he wasn't really paying attention at the time, and he kind of looked at me and said, "Wait, what'd you say?" And I told him again, and he goes, I've heard of a company that does this." And so through his contacts at Bessemer, he found this Swedish company, Linus Markas, which is this woman, and I think her husband, who started in a country of like 10 million people, a service where they would just portion out food and deliver it. And they'd got to, I think like 100 million revenue in 4 years. And so
Wow.
you take that to, 300 million people in the US and you've got like a very large business. And so there was another company, HelloFresh, started by the Samware brothers of Rocket Internet, where they take a model in one country and they spin it up in another. And so they had done that in the UK and I think Germany at the same point. And they were getting ready to come to the US. And so they had approached some of Matt's business school friends. And Matt was actually advising one of his other friends' company that they were doing like send you like subscription whiskey flasks or whatever that you could do like buy whiskey from it.
Sure.
And I remember, Matt did some research on this food delivery business. He came in the next day and he's like, we're doing the food delivery thing. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm like a software engineer. Like, I don't know anything about shipping fish to people over the internet.
Right.
And he was so confident. And so we got to work on it. And then one of his business school friends was like, hey, you should talk to the whiskey guys. And so, so he reconnected with them and he's like, my business school friends are also doing the same idea. And so basically this was June of 2012. We kind of came up with the idea and started working on it. And then we launched in August, like only a couple months later.
Wow.
And at the same time, HelloFresh set up in the US and Plated, which was Matt's business school friends, also set up in the US.
Yes.
So we were all kind of like,
That's Matt's business school friends. Wow. Okay.
yeah. And so it kind of went off to the races from there where,
Right.
this concept didn't really exist at all in America. Like we found like some stuff locally in New York where like walking home from work, you could pick up a bag of ingredients and cook it, but nobody like doing anything national or anything like that. Right before that point, we were like, we need neither of us were food experts, certainly. Like
You need someone who has an idea of how to cook or
Yeah.
a chef or ingredients or.
And so Matt's girlfriend, her father has this like B movie empire called like Troma Entertainment, and I forget if it was like Richard Gere or like all of these like really famous actors got their start like working like being in his movies like Toxic Avenger and stuff like that. And so they used to do all these film festival things. And there was this guy that Matt's girlfriend had known since she was a kid, Matt Wadiak, who was just like, really good chef, but also just like ran these awesome, huge events and just like very good at like creating order from chaos and just like pulling rabbits out of hats. And so she was like, if you're doing a food business, you got to talk to Matt Wadiak. And so she reached out to him, and I remember he showed up. Do you remember those like Halliburton suitcases from the movies in the 80s where like someone's like hanging from a helicopter and they had this big metal suitcase full of cash?
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
He showed up with one of those and he popped it open and he had tons and tons of little cups and bottles and everything. He's like, I did some research. He's like, I think we can put the spices in here. We can put like soy sauce in here. He like, he just hit the ground running. He had so many incredible ideas. And Matt and I, debated. I was a little bit like, hey, should we bring on another co-founder? We could probably easily like hire a chef. And he's like, no, this guy is like 10 times better than everybody else. Like we could ever find. And so we decided to bring him on as a co-founder. And he was like, great, I'm excited. But like, he's like, I'm not coming on board unless you change the name. And at the time, similar to the ideas, we had filled a whiteboard with 50 ideas. And we had filled another whiteboard with, 60 names. And these were, not great names like Happy Apple and Dewdrop and, Food to Your Door. The name we landed on was Part and Parsley, which was trying to be
that?
like the mashup of like part and parcel, which means taking the good with the bad, which isn't even a good connotation if anybody understands it, and then parsley, which is like a garnish,
Right?
like like most people didn't even eat. They would get a steak with a piece of this parsley on the side. And so he's like, you got to call it Blue Apron, and And we were like, no, we already like set up the website. We already set, all the materials are set up for Part and Parsley. Like we're good to go. And he's like, I'm not.
Logo. We love our logo. It's
We,
awesome.
yeah, we paid all this money for a logo. Um, and, uh, and he was like, I'm not coming unless it's Blue Apron. And we're like, what's Blue Apron? And I remember the designer was like, blue is bad color for food. Like people, associate that with like mold and stuff like that. But he was like, the story is, when chefs are learning to cook in France, they wear a blue apron. And then there are certain famous chefs like Thomas Keller in the French Laundry in California that continue to wear a blue apron as a sign of humility that they're never done learning.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm like, okay, that's a pretty good story. So we changed the name, and then we rented out this commissary kitchen in Long Island City in Queens, and it was tiny. It's like 800 square
So
feet.
you had funding for the science Kickstarter,
Yeah,
but so did you use those funds to do this kitchen
we
thing? Like,
did.
how did you get?
We did.
Yeah,
And
okay.
Matt had to call all of our investors, which were mostly, his people. I brought in some family and friends. Um, and he said, hey, the science thing isn't working out. We're going to try this food idea instead. And everybody said, yeah, okay,
Okay.
whatever. Except for one investor that was like, I'm sorry, my mandate is to invest in science. And so I can't do that. And so we just found one of the other investors to buy his share. Um, and then, it happened so fast. We rented out this commissary kitchen in Long Island City, and we packed the first 30 boxes ourselves and delivered them to our friends and family in Manhattan. And they loved it. And it just took off from there, and it totally exploded. I remember the first recipe was super ambitious, though. It was like this Cornish game hen, and Matt wanted to like really deliver like a butcher paper experience. And so he had wrapped up these portions of Cornish game hen, and they were delivered to people. But they started to thaw, they're leaking in the package, and so
Right.
we very quickly evolved to like, hey, everything has to be kind of buttoned up um, and all come out very easily. But it had that effect that was very similar at the time to when people started doing Peloton. If you met someone, you knew, because they would immediately start talking to you about Peloton and how amazing it was. And you have to try Peloton. The same dynamic kind of happened with us. And, Matt Salzberg had a really clever idea from the get-go when we were building the website. He's like, we need to have a referral program in there on day one, where it is not a cash for sending friends our way or whatever. It is a gifting program where once you receive 3 orders, you are then given 3 orders to give to your friends, where they get a totally free, no strings attached try. And it was a really brilliant kind of setup, because once you receive 3 orders, you're into it. Like you're not going to do that if you don't like cooking and you don't like the food. And then giving it as a gift, the person receiving it isn't like, oh, what do you get for sending me this? It's just purely like, here's some free food. And then because there were only 3 that we gave them, people were really careful with who they chose. So they were very selective about finding someone who they thought was really going to like it.
That
And
is a brilliant idea.
from that day until, the day I left, that was still the number one way that the company acquired customers, even though we, at our peak, we were spending hundreds of millions a year on marketing. So the word of mouth effect was incredibly powerful, and the company just explode. It just 5x'd year over year for, I think, 4 or 5 years.
And those referrals were probably, they stayed on longer too, right? Like they were the longer tail customers versus
Yeah.
the churn of.
Anytime we would announce, like the worst was like someone coming in via a daily deal site, like a Groupon or something.
Yeah.
And someone would just get the deal, they get the food, and then they churn.
It'd be
The
gone,
best
yeah.
were always those referrals where someone had been picked, and it's like, this person's really going to do this.
But when I think about this type of business, there's a lot to it, right? There's the tech, the website, order management or whatever is behind the scenes. Is the infrastructure of fresh food and fulfillment. So how do you build all that operation out this quickly based on, how quickly you're growing.
Yeah.
And it's like, we got to ship across the country. We got to go, like it just seems to be mind boggling.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that was Wadiak, who was our, he was a chef by training, but he just had incredible like operational intuition, and he had pulled off all of these crazy events, and um, you know, he just knew how to make things happen. And so he handled, finding, all of the labor for, packing the boxes and preparing everything. He handled designing all the recipes, but building out these fulfillment centers, we started with that 800 square foot center that got us to 300 boxes in a week. And then we rented a place in East Williamsburg in Brooklyn that was got us to, I think, 30,000 a week. That was like maybe 10,000 square feet. And then we ultimately got to a place in Jersey that was 100,000 square feet. We expanded to 200,000. We opened one in Texas, 100,000 with another 100,000 storage facility. And then one in California, like right outside San Francisco, that was another, ultimately expanded to about 200,000. And so with that network, we were sending out millions of meals a week. It just
Millions.
yeah, we had approached at one point we did like $1 billion in revenue in 1 year. Yeah.
So what was your role? So Matt, the chef, was handling all the sourcing of food, the recipes, and workers to pack the boxes.
Yeah.
Then your other co-founder, Matt. Like, so how did you two divide up these responsibilities?
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons why it worked so well was we didn't have very much overlapping skills. So Matt was phenomenal at the finance and the fundraising and marketing copy. Matt Wadiak was very strong on the operations side and the culinary side. And, I understood the technology and how to build systems. And we just were able to like kind of go off in our own corners and just execute without second guessing each other, and just got things done. And so that kind of just scaled out exponentially. So we ultimately at our peak had like 5,500 employees. Most of those were in the fulfillment centers, maybe 500 in corporate. My team was probably like 200 in technology. Like half of that was building software. The other half was kind of managing enterprise systems and warehouse IT, and all the Wi-Fi and all of the scanning devices in the 3 fulfillment centers. So it just kind of kept going in that, like just scaling out, and we brought on different executives as the company reached different points.
And if from what I gathered in my research, a lot of it was like you built this custom, right? This wasn't like off the shelf software to make all this happen. And I guess the hindsight of your experience with Walmart.com and Rulala and all these other e-commerce sites kind of set you up to be able to figure this out.
Yeah, we were, very good at just building whatever needed to be built, especially coming from that consulting background. But yeah, I was convinced we would be able to get some off-the-shelf software, especially as we were talking with Matt Wadiak, and he was saying, hey, we need to build our own warehouse management software. We need to build our own inventory systems. And I'm like, that's insane. There's plenty of systems out there. And so, we looked at Oracle, JD Edwards, and NetSuite and everything. It really was difficult because our business was the intersection of just-in-time fulfillment, e-commerce, and running a grocery store. And so it was all of those systems were kind of purpose built for one, but not this hybrid. And so we ended up building out a lot of our all of the e-commerce tech was built out. There was no like Shopify back then, and then all of the warehouse technology we built ourselves too.
What about the website, the personalization? Was that something that was common at stage, or was it still like early days of personalization?
In terms of like different customers getting different meals and things like that?
Well, first, no, the experience of the consumer coming to your website, maybe getting something personalized. But then, from what I watched an old video of yours, and you were talking about using machine learning for
Yeah.
recipes and ingredients from farmers and forecasting food. Like,
Yeah. So that was, as the offering evolved, we ultimately got to, 20 recipes that you could pick in a given week up from the original three. And then so being able to understand what people were going to be getting became very important. And so, the recipes changed every single week. So it means all the ingredients changed. I mean, you need to be thinking upstream about the food you have to source and the people that you need to bring in because, from a labor standpoint, there's very different amount of work that goes into getting those boxes out the door. And so we had to become very good at understanding who's going to get what and, assigning the right recipes to people based off of their preferences. And then also who's going to order. And so, that was kind of like early days of machine learning. And so we had a really excellent team that kind of built this model that previously the finance team was forecasting with Excel, what the numbers for the week were going to be and how we would plan labor and food orders. And then ultimately the data science team built out this model that's beat the Excel model in terms of predicting and like the percentage variability, like different numbers of weeks out. And ultimately kind of became the predominant way to figure out how do we assign meals and how do we figure out who's going to order what. And there were just certain things that would, anytime there was a burger on the menu, order rates would spike. And then there was this thing we called the enchilada factor, where anytime you put an enchilada on, like you see these like massive orders. So people love that.
that's awesome. All right. So, as you highlighted, when you first launched, there was competition, and even like the competition grew, right? There was others that kind of entered the market. So, this was an arms race similar
Yeah.
to like ride sharing, where it's just
Yeah.
like we have to acquire every customer quicker than our competition and try to reduce
Yeah.
churn and win over customers from HelloFresh or whatever. So
Yeah.
the marketing spend must have been extraordinary.
It did. It got up into the hundreds of millions. And that's another thing that Matt was very good about from the get-go is building out these marketing dashboards to understand exactly, you asked about, hey, if a customer comes in via uh, a referral, do they retain better? Like we had that information from the get-go where we were experimenting with different marketing channels, building this kind of multi-channel approach so we could understand what was working, what had, the lowest cost of acquisition, but also the highest retention on the back end. And finding that intersection allowed us to really lean into the channels that were producing like kind of healthy customers for us. And so, yeah, we had two competitors when we started, when we went public in 2017. 5 years later, we had 200 competitors. And so all of the cost of acquisition became, much more expensive. But, we found these pockets like direct mail, like just sending people's mailers was performed really well. And so yeah, it was over 100 million in marketing at our peak. And that was adding customers pretty quickly, but it became clear that you were starting to see like it was harder to kind of get those incremental people in because there was so much competition. And so the category started to kind of approach that like saturation point.
Okay, well, as you highlighted, there was an IPO. So what was that like? Like, okay, you're in this hyper growth, you're growing 5 years, it's just like running so fast, scaling. Then you get to the point where it's like, wow, okay, this is happening. So what was that like? Like, I don't know, the roadshow or whatever, the investment bankers, like, and then the day of the
Yeah.
IPO.
I mean, it was a lot of work. I think, we had raised the Series D, Fidelity led that. And the logical path was like kind of after this, like you should probably IPO. And so we started to kind of take the steps to do that. We brought in an amazing CFO who had previously been the CFO and COO of Under Armour, Brad Dickerson. And so he came on board and started the process of hiring the people we needed to start, getting Sarbanes-Oxley ready. And, there's a huge cost to going public in terms of just operational overhead. I think it's something like 20 or 25% of the company resources and the CEO's time goes towards managing investors and analyst events and things like that. And so, we were talking about the timing and when it was going on, and there was this competitor, HelloFresh, that was also talking about going public. And so this is like kind of like early 2017. We made the call to like, all right, we have to go forward with it. We went public in June. I think HelloFresh went public in September. So there was this kind of like, okay, we have to do this, because if they go out first and it doesn't go well, they're going to set the price, and they might close the door on IPO. And so yeah, that was a ton of work. And then, the day approached, and, leading up to it, there was just so much going on with the company. We were rolling out this whole new fulfillment center in New Jersey that was 500,000 square feet. So it had all this automation, all this stuff none of our other fulfillment centers had ever had under one roof before. We rolled out like all of these choices, the 20 choices of recipes. I think they have like 50 now, that introduced like a ton of complexity. And then, 2 weeks before the IPO, Amazon was also like, hey, we're going to do meal kits now. Yeah. And so that, really put some pressure on. And, we were faced with this decision of like, do we go forward? Or, suddenly the price we were going to come out at, we were targeting, $3 billion. And then it was like, hey, it's going to have to be $2 billion. And like, do you still want to do it? And so we said like, okay, let's just do it. And so, go down to the New York Stock Exchange, ring the bell. One of the most incredible days. Just seeing, we brought the whole company down. We set up these activations in the street where people were, cooking food outside, like on Wall Street. We were having like contests and things like that. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, so we made it. But then, what happened after that was, we just had a lot of operational issues at that warehouse. And like the one thing when you're a public company is you have to like hit or beat your guidance. And so, we had like conveyor belts that kept breaking and we couldn't ship the packages. And so we had to like stop marketing for a spell to kind of get things right. And because of that, we had to revise down our guidance, and the stock just got hammered. And then it continued to get hammered. And so, it was frustrating because customers still loved the product and things were going well, but we couldn't get the company back to that rapid growth rate that had got us to the IPO. And so, fast forward, I think, the company ultimately sold to Wonder, Mark Lowry's company. And I think it was still doing like 400 million in revenue when it did that. So, down from the billion kind of it had reached, but it was still like an impressive revenue number, but it just didn't have that growth, which just wasn't the right profile for a public company.
So you went through this amazing ride. Is there like one story that you just like, oh, I remember when, and everything like blew up, or wow, we did it, or, the accomplishment, or like this hypergrowth 5 years. It's not just like rainbows and butterflies, but like what was that?
Well, that's the funny thing. Like, I feel like I'm spoiled as a founder because, and my brother was like, it's not supposed to be this easy. Like, it wasn't.
It's grinding, building great SaaS software, vertical SaaS.
Yeah. And he had a really tough time before they finally like landed in that staffing category and just crushed it.
Right.
And it was hard, right? Like, I think the technology aspect was probably one of the easier aspects of it compared to the operational challenges of like scaling, getting that much food, keeping the bar high on quality, and, just finding that many talented people to come in and like keep the bar up. It was, it was challenging, and there were fights and everything, but like everything was so good. Like the times were so good. Like when you're growing 5x year over year, it smooths over a lot of warts and, relationship things. And so everybody was still just psyched that things were going well. And also the company itself was just a great magnet for talent because, people who are into cooking or into food are generally kind of like adventurous, curious people, which I find is a great, I'm trying not to say recipe, but like a great indicator of someone who is an awesome person to work with, because they're, finding creative solutions, and there's a passion in there that they're not just, punching a clock. And so we really brought together like a phenomenal group of people to work on the company. So it was a great culture, and everybody loved their work, and they kind of loved what they were doing. And it kind of ties back to that mission, like back to when I was at Rulala, and I overheard the person who had really enjoyed the website that I was a part of. Blue Apron was reuniting divorced parents with their kids, and like they were cooking together, and helping veterans like recover from like PTSD because they feel this sense of independence now that they can cook for themselves. And like these stories would just pour in, and it was like, it felt very fulfilling to work on something that was just making people so happy.
And you built a national brand. People knew Blue Apron, and it wasn't like, no, never heard it. It was like, no, you knew Blue Apron.
Yeah, I think we got to 85% brand awareness at one point. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's why when I was like, saw your LinkedIn profile, I'm like, what? Co-founder of Blue Apron's in Boston. And I saw the last name. I'm like, wait a second. And I went down on your LinkedIn, and I'm like, your early days of working at Bullhorn. I'm like, oh, they must be brothers. Just connecting the dots. Okay. So we talked about Blue Apron. What do you do next? Right. Of course you got to start another company, right? So how did that journey happen, and what are you working on now?
So with everything that happened at Blue Apron, I ended up kind of taking like an operations role for a little bit, and then a lot of the executive team kind of turned over, and a lot of the company turned over. The stock had lost a lot of value, and I really enjoyed kind of stepping into this operational role to help kind of like stabilize things and get us like EBITDA break even. But then it was like, hey, you're going to go back to being CTO. And a lot of the people I'd built the company with were no longer there. And I didn't feel like technology was going to be the thing that unlocked the next chapter for Blue Apron. And so if I wanted to kind of start a company as CEO, I would have to kind of leave to go figure that out. And so in 2019, I decided to leave the company. It was really, kind of it was bittersweet. Ultimately, the right decision. So I took the summer off and traveled with the family a little bit. And then I was like, okay, fall of 2019, like I'm going to start this new company. I started researching lumberyard. I wanted to do like B2B software for like old school businesses. And so I started researching all of these, auto body shops and, anybody who might need software. And then COVID hit. And so we had two small kids that were like 2 and 4, and my daughter was going into kindergarten. And so we had to do like the iPad kindergarten. And then, it just became very hard to focus. But I met, a friend of a friend who, former Blue Apron employee who started a company, and they had this woman, Amy, who was helping them out with product, who, that company ultimately didn't work out, but she was also kind of looking to start something. And so we started this kind of like weekly accountability thing where we would talk about our startup ideas. And so we started exploring ideas together and went into, I had my eyes set on like healthcare. Like I wanted to fix healthcare, and spent like
good luck with that.
You're going deep on that. And then decided like, hey, all the payment in healthcare is really twisted, where nobody's ever like paying for the thing they're getting. It's always a triangle where there's like an insurance payer in the middle. And so all the incentives are twisted, and it's very hard to get rewarded for, helping the patient and then like build a lucrative company in that space. And so I'm always impressed and admire the people who kind of start these healthcare startups. But what we discovered was this concept called group purchasing organizations, which in healthcare, works with 99% of the hospitals and health systems, where they aggregate all of the spend and then negotiate with suppliers to, either get favorable terms or, pricing on goods. And in healthcare, it's like 200 billion flow through these like 3 group purchasing organizations. And then we became really fascinated by this model and found that it exists everywhere. So we found a group of like craft beer brewers that were buying like cans um, and hops and, cleaning solution for their beer production. And
I had no idea that this world
yeah,
existed. Like,
yeah. So there's these buying groups or purchasing cooperatives, whatever it is. Like every major fast food chain has these cooperative, like Wendy's or Subway. They have these pools of all the owners that buy food as a unit and negotiate as a unit. And we just became really fascinated of this model where trillions of dollars were kind of passing through this annually, and there was no software for it. And so we built out this technology to kind of serve as the operating system for these buying groups. And the two key things that they dealt with on a daily basis were taking in messy transaction data from all of the members of the group, and then taking in all these agreements that were in very different formats and had very complicated structures of, if you grow 10% as a unit year over year, you're getting a 1% rebate. But if you grow 15%, you get another kicker, and it kind of goes back to the first dollar of the year. And so there's like real value that can kind of be unpacked, and tracking these things that everybody was just doing with spreadsheets. And so we just built software that was very powerful at taking in messy transaction data, cleaning it up, normalizing it, and then also taking in agreements in any format and digitizing them and figuring out all of the incentives and who needs a piece carved out for who and what. And so we did that across a bunch of different industries. So veterinary practices, dental practices, construction, franchises. And then we started to uncover that there are other businesses like distributors and manufacturers where like all of their profit is coming from these back end incentives that have like really complicated agreements, and they have like teams of 20 people that just load these into ERP systems and untangle them. And so this year, really, we've started to kind of start working with those customers as well, and just kind of become this ability of like dealing with messy transaction data. And, the taxonomy and, everybody, the manufacturer and the distributor calls it a different category, and like the incentives are tied to the category. So how do you make that work? And tracking all of those incentives to kind of help everybody maximize their margin, understand, what they're going, so they can make more strategic decisions about their business. So it's very different than Blue Apron. But what I love about it is it's a really, really messy, complicated problem with a pretty heavy human element. And to me, that feels like something that's pretty defensible, where, even with AI kind of advancing the way it has, there's always this like discretionary component that has to be baked into the work that we do. So it feels like we're solving hard problems for people, and they're willing to pay for that value.
in an underserved industry, right? Like, you talked about your project with the Knights of Columbus. Like, who knew they were the, what'd you say, third largest insurer of some sorts? So this is a whole industry where there's trillions of dollars being like transferred through,
Yeah.
like these, like, so, and there's tremendous amount of data. I'm sure the systems were very old legacy, and perfect use case for AI in the modern era, right?
Yeah. So it is something that we talk a lot about, like how we position ourselves, because obviously there's a lot of like very fast growing AI kind of as the headline companies out there. And, the way we kind of look at things is, AI is a tool that everybody is going to be using, and everybody is using already. And I think it's more about like, what can you accomplish? Like, what is the problem that you are solving? Where I love AI and what it's doing for us and our customers that I think was previously very difficult or almost impossible is dealing with the nuance of like figuring out how to clean up the data. This manufacturer calls this customer one thing in their ERP system. And by the way, their ERP system is really old. So they start putting all of this irrelevant information into different fields in their ERP because they have nowhere else to store it. And so you need to untangle that and figure out, how does that connect to what I have in my system? And you can build rules to do that programmatically, but that's very time consuming. whereas AI can just go in and infer based off of context and what it knows about both the businesses. Um, hey, I already went ahead and made these mappings, or I found this. I'm like 95% sure this is it. Can you just confirm it? And so that just saves a ton of time for people. And then on the flip side, when it comes, like once you get your data cleaned up and you have all of your agreements in, and obviously reading like paper invoices and everything is now super easy with AI. Um, you can extract these really powerful insights that previously took data teams tons of time to compile and build these dashboards of like, hey, we have this agreement with this type of customer, but these customers look like them and they have no incentive tied to them. Like, we should add those. This is the type of thing companies would do once a year that they can now do in real time.
So where's the business now? Like I was trying to figure out, did they raise capital? And I couldn't really find anything, but
Yeah.
I was on somehow at some point I was on the NextView website and I saw your logo. So I'm like, though they had to have raised if there's, if
Yeah.
they're in the portfolio here, but it's like your Blue Apron was like raise, grow, hyper growth, right? This is like a different model.
Yeah. And I think, the coming from the Blue Apron experience, I feel like we built something so amazing and so much of it was in our control, but there was this market element that did feel a little bit outside of our control. Once all these competitors showed up and, the it was hard to keep growing. Um, it was very important to me to do something where it's like, if we do a good job and we solve the problem for these customers, we'll be rewarded and our investors will be rewarded and our employees will be rewarded. So I wanted to just make sure that we were approaching this in a way where um, we're validating the problem. We're kind of becoming like the best in the industry for solving that problem and building a brand and kind of taking it a little bit more, like less splashy, a little bit more slowly. We did raise venture capital so we could have the resources we need to lean into demand and lean into like solving those problems faster than if we had bootstrapped. But we've been a little bit more thoughtful about the way we approach this, the way we like find the right repeatable process of really finding a pain point that people are looking to solve. And so, yeah, the business is not, not on its path to like, $1 billion in revenue in a few years, like Blue Apron, but we do have stable revenue and customers that are sticking with us and renewing, and we now have like a very clear and achievable path to profitability next year, which is not the goal, but really important milestone, especially in this environment where everybody's looking at software companies and the valuations are all over the place. And I really love the idea of us being able to get to a point where we're in the driver's seat of, do we want to raise more money? Do we want to like lean into this opportunity more aggressively? Or are we going to, take our time and like continue to like build up, a really like powerful offering and be able to just be around to kind of seize on all of these opportunities. And so the optionality that comes with that next year is something I'm really excited about because the team's worked really hard and now, we've more than tripled this year. Um, and, uh, and things are really starting to kind of take off.
Well, I think that's an important upshot takeaway from this conversation is if you have that opportunity to be in the driver's seat, be in the driver's seat because of optionality. And I'm making stuff up. I don't have any data to support this, but it's just the vibe I get from the market. There's 3 different types of companies out there right now. There's the native AI companies. They're raising, they're growing. But then there's these 2 other buckets of companies that maybe raised during the zero interest rate financing terms. They were very new and relevant. They're not AI. They're trying to figure out their AI strategy because all the investors are like, well, what are we doing here? like we can't, we're going to become irrelevant in 6 months with these, upstarts. So if you raised, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, you're already becoming irrelevant, which I don't remember that in a cycle ever happening. It's pretty crazy. And then there's companies that just are now really legacy that just aren't going to, maybe they'll get acquired or they're just not going to make it. So it's a weird time in the market of all these companies out there over the past, 5-7 years when they've raised.
Yeah, and I think it's it's simply like the customers we're working with are all in kind of like a little bit of a wait and see mode. So things have been moving along, but like slower than what we've heard historically, just because of tariffs, right? Like tariffs heavily affect distributors and
Right.
manufacturers.
True. Yeah.
And I think in the tech world, you're seeing a little bit of wait and see around AI, and everybody's saying, "Hey, I don't, want to make a really big bold move, um, because AI might come and eat my lunch tomorrow or totally change things." And I think that has to kind of settle in a little bit. And what I like about having the ability to extend our runway to infinity is that like we're not tied to that. And so there's a lot of those companies that were able to raise an incredibly high valuation, um, but now they have to deliver on it, and they may never, depending on
If you had
how
a
their
billion dollar
business is doing.
valuation, your outcome needs to be massive. And you took a company public, and
Yeah,
$2 billion valuation, whatever the IPO was, like that was a lot. And like to have that billion-dollar valuation, the unicorn label, that's like you just set yourself up for hopefully something great, but there's a lot behind to make it great. So that's not
yeah.
always the end all be all.
I mean, that works only as long as the valuations are as high as they are. And so if you raised it 1 billion, and now if you were to do the same round 3 years later, and that's like 100 million, then you're really stuck in a tough spot. So we're trying to be a little bit more conservative, but also we're willing to be aggressive if we really like kind of see something that is working, and we can really like step on the gas.
All right. So 3 apps you can't live without. Can't be Slack, email, or calendar.
Yeah. Well, I do love granola. I've found it's been really good for, getting insight, especially our team uses it for, their check-in meetings with customers. And it's great to be able to just go in and ask questions of like, if I'm going to talk to one of our customers, I can just say, "Hey, what's top of mind?" Similar, Notion AI is a really, impressive tool where, you know, Glean, you can't even get them to talk to you unless you're going to pay, $60,000 a year. Notion has a very good alternative to that, uh, where it can hook into your Google Docs and your email and your calendar, and just scour to find really relevant information. So I think that saved a lot of time asking in Slack too. Um, Time otherwise that you'd just be asking the team questions and someone's got to go dig something up for you. You just get the answer right away. Um, so those are those are definitely pretty favorites right now.
What about a good podcast or book recommendation for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, the Lenny's podcast has been great. Lenny Rachitsky, really love the guests he has on, and his general demeanor is just like very positive and
I know. He's like so relaxing to listen to. It's just
yeah,
like
there's something
calm.
soothing about it, and he has like very curious people, interesting people on, and the Stripe guys with their cheeky pint has been kind of a
Yeah,
good
I've been
good
checking
listen
that out
too.
too. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Yeah, and then on the books, a friend of mine who's also an entrepreneur recently told me, I was telling her like we're uh, we're going through a period where we're just doing so much, and focusing is and prioritization has we've been feeling the pain of not doing that. And she recommended this book, 10x is easier than 2x, which I'm still getting through right now, but it's really helping me kind of take a step back and look at ideas with fresh eyes. And the idea is like basically you can 2x what you're doing by working twice as hard. But if you set a goal to 10x what you're doing, you kind of work the same amount, but you have to abandon everything that you're doing today and kind of adopt new tactics. And it's like you're not going to see those big opportunities unless you're looking for them. And so I think it's an interesting way to kind of take a step back from, you know, grinding it out when there might be a smarter approach to take.
That book has not been brought up yet, and it sounds like something that I need to read.
Yeah.
Or I listen to all my books. I don't I
Yeah,
don't
it's on
read
it's
actually
on the
audiobook.
Spotify premium too, if you want to
Okay,
just listen to
amazing.
it. Yeah, it's great.
What do you like to do for fun outside of work?
Well, I've got 3 small kids, and so that's just amazing to kind of see the world through their eyes and relive my childhood a little bit. So mostly with them. And then I do love golf. I don't really get to play, but when I do, it's a treat because I'm not very good at golf, but it's one of those things where you can just improve and it's very rewarding to, everybody kind of plays at their own level and see that improvement. So maybe one day when I'm much older, I'll get good at golf, but right now I just enjoy it.
Yeah, it'll suck you in on the 18th hole when you hit a good shot finally, and you're like, "Oh my God, that was amazing!"
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Ilia, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story. Obviously, all the great entrepreneurial efforts behind Blue Apron and what you're up to with Band, and obviously all the great advice.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. This was great.